Good evening. Our keynote speaker tonight, Dr. Francois Louange, was born in Versailles in 1945. After scientific studies in Grenoble, he qualified as a doctor engineer or a PhD in signal processing in 1968. He joined the European Space Agency, also known as the ESA, in 1977, first in Darmstadt, Germany, where he worked on satellite data processing, then in Madrid, Spain, as computer manager in the frame of the NASA/ESA Astronomical Space Project, IUE, processing images of ultraviolet spectra. Regarding the UFO phenomena, Francois Louange became seriously interested in 1975 and tries, without success, to create an official department within the ESA. As soon as he returns to France in 1980, he collaborates actively with the UFO department JAIPAN in the French space agency CNES, or CNES, as a consultant on photo analysis as well as on detection of network projects. He takes part in the Pocantico workshop on a panel of scientists. Here to talk about UFO photo analysis, let me welcome to the stage Dr. Francois Louange.
So let us start. The JAIPAN is one, we have in France one of the unique departments devoted to UFOs, which is not depending on defense. And I will first tell you the history between the apparition of the JAIPAN in 1977 until 2001. Then I'll talk about an audit that took place in 2001 and how the things are working now in a new scheme. So what happens is that in that period, in 1977, the conjunction was very auspicious to create something in France, just because randomly 3 events had happened. The first one is that Minister of Defense had publicly said, I think it was on television, that the UFO problem had to be taken seriously. The second one is that a group of former officers of the French defense had produced a thick report explaining why the UFO problem should be taken seriously. And the third reason is that inside the French space agency, there was an engineer, very active, very interested, who had been starting heavy work on that and constituted some initial database with the authorization of the direction. So the director of this agency decided in 1977 to start officially the JAIPAN, which stands for the Group of Study for the Unidentified Aerospace Phenomena. This group was under the control of a scientific board with highly qualified people from everywhere, including the president of the agency itself, which was defining the directions to follow, which was giving the advice and telling which studies had to be undertaken. The work of this department from the very beginning was organized around agreements, official agreements with several administrations in France. That's a kind of uniqueness of what we have in that country. The agreements were in the police. We have in France a second kind of police we call gendarmerie, which depends directly from the Ministry of Defense. Agreements with the Air Force, with the civil aviation, just to have access to available data and to get reports in an official channel. They developed a methodology, which I will comment one page later, and started building databases out of the cases they had in hands coming through the official channels I mentioned before. In fact, they had two big databases being built. First, for the ground cases, which were coming through the gendarmerie and the police. And the second one, the so-called aerial cases, which were coming from both the military Air Force and the civil aviation. And the databases were taking cases into 4 classes, A, B, C, D, which I will explain later. Then in 1883 and until 2005, there was a kind of crisis about this study of UFO in France. You know, this subject is extremely touchy, and all depends on the sensitivity of key persons. So depending which is the director, you can have a tendency to do a lot of job or to try to reduce it. And that's what happened during many years. There was a permanent downsizing of this service. And those of you who have followed what happened over there in France have noticed probably that more and more, or rather less and less, were things coming out from this department, because the thing was going from 7 to 5, 3 to 1 person. It was impossible to do something very serious. Just a word on the methodology that was built up during the glorious initial years of the JEPAN. The things we are talking about are events that take place somewhere and that we want to define. And in fact, there is a stimulus, which is what really happened, which we don't know, we would like to grasp. And this representation of a tetrahedron takes into account the fact that what we can really touch and receive as data is first testimony, which is what the witnesses are saying. So that's text analysis of what people say and analysis of the content. The second element of information is the witness himself. Of course, this is like a captor. We have to analyze this guy. Of course, if a witness is completely alcoholic or mad or whatever, it will have a different weight from the case where everything is clear. There is a third point, which is, of course, the physical environment, where things happened, what was there, what was the meteorological conditions, what was the status of the sky, if we are talking of a night event. And the last one is important, is the psychosocial environment, which takes a lot of importance. People telling what they've seen will speak according to the psychosocial environment. I remember having lived in Spain and hearing about descriptions which could be really the same if they applied to an apparition of the Virgin or a flying saucer, just depending on the culture of the different families. So this is the way the JEPAN is trying to organize how to grasp information, to collect information, and to scrutinize what is usable. Now, as I said, there was a period of downsizing of this service up to the point where in the year 2000, there was a crucial decision to be taken. In fact, the Director General of the French Space Agency was under pressure to suppress this borderline activity on UFOs. And many people told him you should just suppress it, it's pointless. Others were telling him you should reorganize it more properly. The fact is, as it stood, it had no use at all. There was very bad coordination, there was no information for the public. So the director decided to back his decision either to stop this or to restart on healthy basis to produce an audit. And this audit was contracted to the company I was heading, and in fact to myself, because the director of the agency knew I knew many things about this UFO business. And the problem was to establish a document telling what is the situation in the year 2000 in the world. Are there other countries where serious things are done? But most important was to get, if possible, the opinion of the highest management in the areas potentially involved by UFOs. This means the science, and I've been in touch with the highest levels of the scientific institution, the politics, defense, police, and even media, to know why they thought that it should be stopped or it should be continued, why it should be stopped at all or continued, if yes, in the space agency or elsewhere, and so on. So I did this very, very interesting job and met many people. In fact, officially 30 personalities, produced documents which were certified by the personalities, so I didn't write just what I wanted to write, it had to be checked. And all this made a complete document which I remitted to the direction of CNES. And this document said, yes, you should resume serious activity on this project, it's worthwhile. And the consensus of the persons I've met is that there are two reasons for that. And it's very interesting to know what are the reasons that those people said, because there are two reasons which are completely of different nature. They are non-exclusive, and the thing is some people against the first reason, for the second one, and all the combinations. The scientific reason is the most self-evident one. If we observe something in nature that we don't understand, the scientific attitude just consists of trying to understand. That means gather information and try to derive laws out of it and understand what happens. And many of the 30% I've seen thought that effectively UFOs were deserving this type of reason for continuing the work, but not all of them. The second reason has nothing to do. It's a civic reason. It's very down to earth for us who are interested in the UFO business because we know what we're talking about, or in principle. But the civic reason is the following. It's a fact, undisputable fact, that there is a demand. It's a fact that the public is asking things about UFOs. It's a fact that some official institutions are asking the state information about that and answers to questions. It's the case for aviation because there is flight safety problems. It's the case of defense because to some extent there might be territory protection problems. It's the case for media who want to know. So what was said by all these high-level people I met, nearly 100% of them, is whatever the problem of UFO is, even in the extreme case that there is nothing behind it, in the case it's a complete fantasy coming from the spirit of some people, even in that case, it would be worthwhile to have a dedicated possibility to produce healthy answers to the questions of the public and the people. Because if we don't do that, we just leave the room for all the lunatics, all the fanatics, and anything can happen, and sects and whatever. So the conclusion of the audit was it should be continued. And in fact, the conclusions were taken into account, and due to internal problems that have nothing to do with UFOs, it lasted several years before something happened in this administration. But in 2005, the new GEPAN started again. So the name, as I had recommended, was back to the first name, because in the meantime it had changed several times from GEPAN to SEPRA, and the meaning even of the acronym had been changing. So GEPAN is something clearer. They just added an I in the middle for information, because it was my feeling, and I put it in the report, and it was taken into account, that the key point was to open the information to the public. There was no point to constitute lots of databases and not answer any question because this is more or less secret or whatever. So the new JPAN is working with a priority to give information to the public, and in this intention it has created a dedicated website. So the missions of the JPAN are to collect, analyze, and archive sightings in France. Unfortunately, we are talking of an administration, so we have limits, and these guys are working with cases occurring in France. The mission is also to inform the public through the website, as I said, and this website is giving many information and renewed information on cases, including old cases which are reprocessed and presented with the statistical properties to the people who want to see this website. And also there are a lot of indications of the errors not to do, all the sources of confusions, and God knows how many there are in our field. Now the staff of this small department is very modest, of course, but sufficient to do a serious job. There are 2 permanent people, the head of the JPAN, who is, by definition, they take an engineer with several decades experience in space systems, and also many, many years experience of the UFO problem. But in addition, they have 2 contractors to do the work, the investigations and so on, full-time, and 20 volunteer on-site investigators, which are selected all over France by regions, so they can act as soon as something which is worthwhile is signaled in any part of France. Also, there are 15 volunteer experts in various domains from various laboratories in order to do expertise when there is a need for such or such a kind of expertise. Above all this is a steering committee. It's not just a scientific committee. No, we have a steering committee with people responsible of the various involved organizations. It means we have top-level people from the police, from the forces, from, of course, university researchers, and so forth. 14 people. So the new JPAN is working and classifying the cases in 4 categories. In fact, very recently, we split the 4th into 2 subcategories. We call case A a case which is fully explained. That's clear. B is a case which is probably explained. It's a case we cannot swear 100% because there are not many sufficient data or whatever, but it's probably explained and not very interesting. Case C is a bit the sad part of it, is the cases with insufficient information. Sometimes we have potentially very interesting things, but with information which is so small that we can't do anything on it, especially if there is only one witness, if there is nothing else than one testimony and no trace, no record of any sort, no picture, no. So these cases cannot be treated. Maybe they are real UFOs, maybe, we don't know. The D are the interesting part of it, are the unexplained. The unexplained have been very recently split into D1 and D2. Try to make a small classification. D2 means a case which is strange with a medium consistency. Medium consistency means that there are not many superimposed informations. For instance, we have one witness. We do not have really several things that confirm each other what happened. D2 would be the crème de la crème, would be a very strange case with high consistency. Now, they have at present available the statistics over 30 years, which consists of 2,200 cases. Again, these figures are not small, but they apply to only France itself, which is not as a big country as yours, of course. 202,000 cases out of 6,500 reports. Of course, there can be many reports on the same case. Interesting to note is that 10% are coming from pilots during flight. It's not negligible. And on the other hand, 10% were strong enough to lead to an on-site investigation. Here is the statistic over the cases I mentioned right now. We see that the class A of identified, it's 9%, after all, it's not very big. The probably identified is 28. The big part, unfortunately, is the part C, which means we cannot work of it because it's insufficient information. We keep it, but we cannot do anything serious out of the available data. And the D part is still 22%, so it's not negligible. And of course, we're interested in the D part if we want to go further in the analysis of UFOs. A few short examples of very recent strange cases over France. There was a luminous, huge wheel. I don't know if you can see, that's a drawing made by the witness of a Cône-sur-Loire in 2011, for instance. And one of the latest one is over Toulouse in 2011, a huge triangle which was sketched in superimposition with a picture taken from the same place where the witness was at that time. This is the case of Toulouse. The JPAN, to do his work, has established links with specialized laboratories. The characteristics of the study of UFOs, as opposed to SETI, for instance, which is a very fascinating subject, but which belongs to one area of techniques, which is radio astronomy. The UFOs involve many, many specialties, so it would not have any meaning, even in an official institution, to want to create a small group with all the know-how to deal with things as extreme as analysis of soils or pictures or whatever else. So the good thing with official representation is that they can establish links with specialized laboratories, and possibly the best in the country, for celestial mechanics, for natural history museum concerning meteorites, lightning laboratory, materials analysis, and biology for traces. And to talk about my personal activity with JPAN, over the last years we have developed a special effort on photo-video analysis. On one hand, on the methodology to process images, which will be the second topic of my speech, and also on the development of a specific software dedicated to that, and I will talk about that later. The JPAN had some innovating activities. I should mention, especially the first one, investigation method. There are research, in fact, a doctorate are being done on subjects which are initially dedicated to justice, to Department of Justice, which is how to finally organize interviews of witnesses, not to bias in any way their answers. It seems very easy. It is not, and it's very complicated. And the interesting thing is that those people doing this research for justice are doing also in parallel the same work for the profit of JPAN. And we have much to learn about it, because even the very experienced investigators from time to time do not know, but they induce very indirectly the way to answer to people. And if we can have methods to avoid this, it's of course a step forward. Also, they have installed, to speak about innovating activities, a wide-angle camera which is permanently pointed towards zenith in the site of the CNES in Toulouse. So that gives them a chance to find information firsthand. And to finish with a description of what this department is doing, I should mention, of course, being here, the agreement passed with the MUFON in the beginning of this year, 2013. And this can be translated in the following two laws, two principles. First, if MUFON France he's facing a case that happened in France and has difficulties to treat it by himself or wants further explanations, he should direct it to the JPAN, who will do the job. And in the other way, if JPAN is aware of a case happening somewhere else than in France, so they are not supposed to devote efforts to it, they should send the witness to the MUFON for investigation. Okay, that was might try to explain in a few words what is being done in France by the GEPAN. Of course, there are more details in the proceedings, and I'll be here in the next couple of days and available to answer more accurate questions. Before we go to image analysis, I just want to say a few words about my person just to justify what I can study now. So as was said before, I spent most of my professional career in the space business, European Space Agency, but in the next step I was working for the French defense in the frame of space projects of, let's say, spy satellites. And I've been developing techniques for analysis of images for intelligence purposes during many years. First as a consultant for defense, and then I created my own company called Fleximage, which was completely dedicated to that. We were working on that subject, analysis of, we are far from UFOs here, but we are still talking about images, analyzing images from satellites or drones or whatever for the sake of intelligence. And we developed software, a specific operational software for that, which was provided to all the forces in France, but which I sold also to Japan and Korea and several other countries. So that's what I did professionally, but in parallel, for 40 years, I've been extremely interested in the UFO business and trying to make it progress. So as was mentioned in my presentation, I failed getting a special department created in the European Space Agency. But as soon as the GEPAN was created, I worked with them contractually, officially, on several analyses, on several state-of-the-art in the field of detection of phenomena in the atmosphere and so on, and produced about 15 technical reports out of my contract. Now, the position I have about UFOs in 2 words, I'm always afraid of the question, do you believe in UFOs? Because I don't want to escape it, but this question can be interpreted in about 100 different ways. So depending on the ways, the answer is yes or no, or I don't know. In fact, if the question is, do you believe there are extraterrestrials living with us right now already? No, I'm not convinced of that, although it might be true, but I've never seen the proof of that. But if the question is, do you believe in UFOs being a real problem? I say definitely yes. Yes, because the established fact is that we have thousands and thousands of testimonies and records, and this cannot be wiped out. Of course, we can wipe out a large part of it, maybe 80, 90%, if we do the effort of trying to understand, because there are a lot of errors. There are hoaxes, but much more errors, good faith errors. People are mixing things or do not know what they've seen, or even in some cases, experimented pilots may have errors concerning specific atmospheric phenomena or things like that. But there is a reminder, and this reminder is enough and sufficiently correlated in the whole world to justify really research, because I'm convinced personally that there are things to discover in this which are very strange. Maybe we are talking about extraterrestrial visitors with flying saucers, but why just be that? I think it can be far more extraordinary than that. Maybe we are just in speculation, but when we see where science is, again, today official science explains the world with a theory in which 90% of the matter and 90% of the energy of the world is unknown. If you read the present theories, you have black matter, black energy, no idea what it is. So it's not to laugh at science, of course not, on the contrary, but it's just that we must obviously expect that there are new Newtons to come in with the apples falling, and new discoveries to be done, maybe in extra dimensions, maybe in things like that, or new interpretation of the notion of time. I don't know. So back to UFOs, there is a problem. There are data. Out of these data, if we are serious, we can eliminate many of them because we can explain them. We should not be just believers and say, doesn't matter, this all constitutes. I heard recently, maybe today, the following sentence: every testimony or every record is part of the puzzle of the UFO problem. I don't fully support this idea, because I think if you let too many things which have nothing to do in the basket, it's not the puzzle. The puzzle is completely transformed. I mean, say that we will extract more data from the noise, letting the noise enter has limits. If we leave 2,000 cases of Chinese lanterns come in our database, someday everything will be biased by that, and it has nothing to do with what we're interested in. So there is a problem of UFOs. We have to be serious about it and to try to progress in understanding if this is possible with today's knowledge. So that was more or less the definition of the UFO problem. My personal opinion is that, has always been, that's why I've been fighting to get this service working in France, that there is a need for an official organization. I do not mean by that that an official researcher is more clever than a private researcher. The contrary is proven every day. This is not the point. The point is that for a very difficult subject in science, and God knows how complicated is the UFO subject, because if we are honest, in the past 60 years, our progress was about 0, say epsilon to be polite. So it means it's very complicated, and complicated research means continuity. And continuity cannot be ensured with the ups and downs of private life. And what is done on a private basis could be very good, but it never lasts the time you can imagine. So there is a need. And also there is a need for an official one, because to be authorized to receive data from administrations like Air Force or even civil aviation, you cannot be an individual. This will never work. You have to have kind of official administration to administration agreements. The last personal point I would like to raise is something that was brought to my attention by Alan Hynek when he very kindly invited me to spend one day in Evanston in his house in 1977. He told me, look, what we are investigating are cases that come to us because they come to us. This is what I called the passive investigation. I mean, the witness we know of are witnesses who happen to have an experiment and decide by themselves, I'm going to see the police or a ufologist or a newspaper, but many of them don't decide anything. If we are talking about records, we are talking of pictures that are taken at random, a trace which is seen on a radar echo somewhere, which was not just at random, but it is passive. It's just what comes up by chance. Now, as opposed to this passive way, what I suggest, what Alan Hynek suggested me to experiment, which I did immediately when I was back to Spain. This time I was working in Spain, is to be active. So active for testimonies meant you just put a want ads in a very serious newspaper and say something like scientific people from such and such are studying the UFOs. If you have an experiment, please tell us. The discretion is 100% insured. That means that for a man who is interested to come up on television or be cited in the press, it's no interest, because from the start we say you won't be mentioned. But on the contrary, if you do that, and I experimented it very positively when I had time, you have all the category of people who come to you and say, well, this looks serious, you look serious, and I'd like to tell you what happened to me so many years ago, and I never talk to anyone because I don't want to look my position. I've seen high-level politicians, I've seen pilots, I've seen people who could have lost their job, and they say, okay, in these conditions, I can tell you, I won't be mentioned ever. So this is the active way I should suggest. I don't know how, because this needs time and money, but it's really very active, and I'm very thankful to Alan Hynek to have giving me this idea. Talking about records is the same thing. Rather than wait for data to fall on a camera or a system of whatever technique, we should also try to foresee an active system, which is a surveillance system. And this has been tried several times. I've been working on a project of this type on a European level at some stage, and it was abandoned for reasons which are nothing to do with UFO, but I had to convert it in a more modest project inside the French defense, and it did work, wide angle, and try to reconstruct trajectories and things like this. This has been done, meanwhile, in various places. We can talk also of the Hesdalen project in Norway, where, as you know, as many of you know, there are repetitive sightings of phenomena. So in a place where things are repetitive and happen every year, it's really worthwhile putting some devices to capture data. Should it be just pictures or films or beta spectra or things that could provide science some elements to work on? Okay, now if we go back to the standard way to go for a scientific approach of UFOs, I just remember basic things. I will be very fast because for most of you this is absolutely well known for long. The different steps of the scientific approach, the first is, of course, if you see data, is to try to identify from the start, which is very often possible if you have a good knowledge of the spectrum of things that can happen and provoke the impression that somebody has seen something ununderstandable. So first one is identify if possible, of course. Of course, if we can't identify, we are talking of unknown. And we are exactly in the field of science of observation. What can be done? Try to characterize, to make measurements, to put figures in front of what we've seen, just to be able to compare and to see if things can be repeated. This has been done for decades already in the field of UFOs. Then if we have several categories of events with the same characteristics, that's also the typical of the observation sciences. You do classification, which means we group things which are looking alike and can derive statistics out of it. And the best step, unfortunately, we are not that far, but it's to go to modeling and try to model something new as a phenomenon or as something more extraordinary than a phenomenon. Here is what happens if we take, I don't want to be boring with techniques because first it's boring, and especially in Las Vegas we shouldn't be boring. But just try to stress some important points. Everybody is not necessarily quite familiar with picture analysis and what means a picture, what can be in a picture. So I'll try to give just a few key points. So when we receive a document, photo or video, we receive also all the technical data, if possible, about this photo and the environment and the testimonies and all the data related. So the first step, which is very often enough, as I said, is visual examination of the data, the external data, and we go to an identification. The second step is to try to see if the picture is authentic. What do I mean here? If you have a camera and the camera produces a picture with something in it, the first question to know is if this something corresponds to something real beyond the camera. Of course, there are many cases where you have something and nothing beyond the camera, especially if one of the multiple spurious effects that can happen inside the optics of a camera is there, or if we are talking of a hoax, of course, and the domain of pictures is the one where we find really hoaxes. Excuse me. So step one is to know if the image is authentic in the sense that it represents something which was in front of the camera. In this sense, for instance, the picture called of Petit Rochin, which is the well-known picture from the Belgian flap, for which the witness this year decided to tell the truth, that it was a trick. They had built something out of polystyrene. But still, this picture, as a picture, is authentic because he had really taken a picture of something. In this case, this something was of little interest, but okay. The next step, if it is authentic, it means there was something behind. This something can be either an object, really, material object, or can be a luminous phenomenon, purely luminous. In any case, we have to go to the step 2, which is analysis and gather information and try to do the things I will name later. And this can lead us to the identification, again, of a phenomenon, and if not, to the characterization of what we can call at that point in time a UAP, an identified aerospace phenomenon. I will just show you a few examples of course, I apologize in front of those of you who were expecting from me new scoops and fantastic pictures with a family of aliens and things. I don't have that. And what I'm going to show, with one exception, are images which were explained at the end. But the aim, again, is to explain how we do that. I want to be clear. I'm not a debunker. A debunker is somebody who decided once and for all that all this is rubbish, so whatever I get, I will prove it's wrong. No. But I believe, on the contrary, is that if we want to have a chance to progress more than in the past 60 years, we have to be absolutely sharp on whatever comes to us, because we have no time to waste with data, which in the end are explained by very well-known things. So the first example is a case where we don't need to have analysis in terms of photo analysis on the computer. It's a funny story. I was very surprised when I saw this. It's a video that came from Metz in France. And the day this video arrived to Jean-Jacques Velasco, who was at that time the head of the SEPRA, like the Japon, he was working with me in my company. And we immediately, when we received this cassette, projected it, and we were very impressed. As you will see, it is showing something like a disc or a symbol, which is zigzagging in the sky of Metz. Could I have the first video, please? That's it. So I'm sorry, the quality of the video is not what it should be because of technical problems we had. But it looks, as you see, like a disc or a... And in the same time, we received a second video the same night from another place in the same city of Metz showing something similar. So it was a bit impressive, I must say. But what was done immediately, a good reflex from the department of the Space Agency in France, was to check the position of this at that time precisely from this place. And what could be checked is that this was very exactly the moon. So why does the moon look like a symbol which is zigzagging in the sky? In fact, we were in a very particular conditions of observation, what is called a parhelion. It's a phenomenon where you have a cloud of suspended crystals in the sky, which are changing the shape of what you see. On top of it, the zigzag was due to the fact that although the guy who was filming thought he was static, he was a little bit trembling, which is enough to create all the zigzag. So that's a case where a good examination is just enough. But we've been a little bit frightened during a few minutes on that one. That's a funny one. I've been sent this picture a couple of years ago, taken by a guy in La Flèche, France in 2006. And this I received in the form of a digital image, which is shown here on the left, and you see a huge UFO, which was supposed to be a digital picture taken of the original, which was a silver picture. It was a negative of a color silver picture. But the guy at that time didn't know any longer where was the original. So he sent me this, and of course I had several doubts, but I insisted very much with the pressure of quasi-official things that he finds in his drawers, but he has to find the negative. And surprisingly, in the end, he told me, I send you the negative. So he sent me the negative. And when I received it, it was very strange things. It was a very bad state. And above all, it was this. Maybe it's difficult to see because it's a negative, a color negative. But what I realized very quickly is that if we compare both, on the left you have the copy made by a digital camera, and on the right, the original. So if you look at that, you see that if you compare the circles in yellow, you have details in the copy, so-called copy, where you see more of the landscape than in the original. So the guy told me, yes, but this can be a special effect. I said, look, if you are right, you are a millionaire because you have invented a machine that creates information out of nothing. So we close this story at this point, of course. This is another funny story. It's a long time ago. I was very lucky because I was just finishing a contract for the space agency about that was in 82 or 83. I was finishing a study on the methodology for analysis of pictures. At that time, we had no PC, no software, nothing, but already I had. And during this time, they received a case from a young boy of 10 years old who had seen through the windows. He was living in a mountain area under the snow, and he had seen 3 objects hovering and taken 2 or 3 pictures. And it was really a gift for me because out of this picture, I could demonstrate by 6 different technical ways. I'm not going to go into them right now. If some are interested, I will tell them. I will tell you tomorrow. But 6 different technical ways that the thing was a trick, and that obviously the objects were stuck on the window itself, which that was very interesting because at that time, as I said, we didn't have all the techniques, and 6 different ways. It's very good to get some recognition by the space agency. That's another case where we had to look at the picture, which is probably the most emotional case I had in my career. At that time, I was working in Spain, and since I was appearing on the TV very often, some people came to me and gave me data because they thought I was serious. They were probably right, I hope. So someday there was a guy who was an artist taking, from time to time, pictures of the sky of Madrid through infrared, with infrared sensitive film. And one of those pictures had a strange spot he had never explained, and he said, I will give you, I don't know what to do with that. And I must say, I brought it back to my work, and I was heading a department with a lot of facilities in terms of photographical laboratory, and we made a lot of developments, enlargements, and things. And some of the settings, we obtained things, I don't know if you can see it very well, but it looks like an object. And if you see on the top, there is something that could look like a window. And on the original picture, you see in this window something that looks like a head and even 2 eye brushes, more or less. And I was so surprised. I showed it to many people who had no clue what this was. And they said, oh, I see somebody here behind the window. So this time I was very, very excited by this case. I said, what can I do with that? And fortunately, we were wise enough at some point to start again the whole analysis and to look at the negative with a microscope, with proper light and things. And we discovered a very, very, very small scratch in the gelatin. And from that, we deduced, by reading the right books, what had happened. It's a funny story. In fact, the guy was developing himself. So at some stage, cutting the roll of films in several segments, you know, these rolls like this, he had left one corner of such a segment pick in the gelatin somewhere, made a micro hole. Then when he did the development, some of the product was diffusing inside the gelatin. When he washed, he probably didn't wash enough the film, and the traces of the developing product were moving randomly in the film, producing a spot which, in certain condition of enlargement and thing, gave a head behind a window. So this was very, very strange. But in the end, we are again in a case that is eliminated. Another funny one of the same period and the same process. I was working in a space station of the European Space Agency, 40 kilometers west from Madrid, very nice place in the middle of nature. And we were hosting a team, an American team, who was experimenting the first generation of meteorological satellites called GOES. And they had big vans and antennas, and they had something to check that the satellite was taking periodically the Earth. The system was called a quick look, producing this kind of picture. You see here And someday, those guys found something else in the picture. So they knew that the computer manager here was a crazy guy looking for UFOs. So they came to my office and said, look, we've seen something. And this small thing, you see on the bottom right, seems like rectangular, so it could be solar panels or things like that. So could it be that by chance, because it was very narrow, the field of this camera, we have seen a satellite here or a UFO or whatever. So they were very excited and asked everywhere in NASA, and in the end they found in a manual how to amplify and get a better resolution for this part of the picture, and they got this, and this is the moon. Just the effect is that by chance this day the moon was exactly in this small corner, and due to the low resolution, Shannon problems, it looked like a square, just pixels, so to say, and it was the moon in the end. So talking about the moon, we go to the step 2, when there is a work to be done analysis. This is something, funny things which happened a few years ago. A friend of my daughter is a guy whose work is to produce films and videos professionally, and he's very interested. And one day he was in Barcelona, and he was on a terrace, and he had the full moon crossing the whole sky. So he had let his camera fixed to take a picture every 2 seconds in order to create later a video with the full moon going through the whole sky. And the funny thing is that looking at it, we see something which at first glance looks like a plane, but if we look at it, it's something which is describing a trajectory which is fixed as regards the moon and not as regards the Earth. So if this is true, of course the object is orbiting around the moon, and if it's true, it's a huge object. So I will show you first the original video. You will see when the moon is in the middle of the course that you see this thing crossing the moon. We will see enlarged after. So can I have the next video, please, which is the full resolution, original. Oh, it takes a few seconds because it's a heavy picture. So this picture, I had given this information in a raw form in the television. I had a team of one of the national TV programs at home one day, and I was bored with showing always the same thing, and I said, oh, I show you something new, a scoop. I have no idea what it is because I have not studied it yet, but that's something which is strange because it looks like something orbiting around the moon. So they passed it on the TV, and of course the micro world of the UFO web activity started like mad during a week. Everyone was, oh, that's again Francois Louange, he must be cheating because he's working for defense. But little by little, there was a group of serious people who really took the problems in hands, and they worked and worked and worked during days and days. And they produced, in the end, such a thick report with exactly the explanation of the thing. Does the video work? No, we've not seen the first one. No, we've not seen the original yet. Oh, it's over. Okay. Okay, sorry. So the zoomed one, please. Pardon? Yeah. Oh, no. Ah, here we go. Here again. Okay. Can we see it again, please, the zoom? Look, zzz, you see this is following the moon. This crossing in reality is 2 minutes. So during 2 minutes, it's following the moon. So if you see the next one is made, you see? So in the next one is made a montage where the moon is fixed and the rest is moving, you will see. So the next one, please. Yeah. The name is stabilized. So we stabilize the moon. You see? It's really moving to the moon in the same time the Earth is. So the last one is the same, but with echo. We leave during a few seconds to see the straight line. You saw it? Okay. But in the end, the explanation is here again something very rare. We had a lot of chance to film that. What happened is exactly at the altitude of, it was a plane in the end, a plane quitting Barcelona. But at the altitude where it was, there was a strong wind. And if you want, the vector, which is representing the wind seen from the ground, was exactly parallel and equal to the vector of the apparent movement of the moon. So the plane plus the trace of the plane, everything was pushed at the same velocity as the moon was moving. So which is extraordinary. I mean, it's difficult to find this. So that was a case, again, where big surprise initially, and in the end we find something which has nothing to do with what we are looking after. This is a case I classify as UAP because although I've been talking about it for 20 years or 30, it's still open to me. It's the case of Costa Rica. This was shot in '71 during a cartographic mission over Costa Rica. It means they were taking pictures every so many seconds, and pictures are overlapping. And one picture, number 200, I think, or 300, is this one with this object, which looked like a huge object on the lake, penetrating the lake or coming out. It's just an impression because we can't prove it. The picture before of the same area and the picture after, nothing. And at that time, somebody discovered this and sent it to the Japon in France, who sent it to me. And I said, okay, this is a picture on paper, so I have no clue. If we don't have the negative, we can't speak. A few years later, Jacques Vallée could manage to go to Costa Rica and pick up the original negative, and he brought it to me in Paris. I was working for the defense, and in these old days, there was no scanners at all. There was 1 or 2 scanners per country, and it was costing millions. So we had one, of course, with the defense. We could do very good scannings of this picture, which were dispatched to the USA, to France, and else. And many people tried to explain it, and honestly, there is no explanation. What is sure is what I can ensure is that the negative was not in question. It is not a star effect again. I've scrutinized it with a microscope and everything, so that's true. Now, what it shows, we have no clue. If it is really at the altitude of the lake, which means 10,000 feet from the plane, then it is huge. It's maybe 50 meters diameter or something like this. But nothing can prove that it was there and not at a different distance. Maybe very close. Maybe it's a small piece of metal which fell from. I have no idea. I have not enough information about it. So that's just typically a case. Although this case is completely borderline as concerns the UFO files, because nobody saw it, so it's one of these mystery pictures which normally we don't take into consideration if there is just a picture. Nowadays, this happens 2,000 times a day, so we are no more much interested. But the difference of this picture is that it's very rich in terms of the information. It's really a shape with a lot of details and things, so it remains a mystery. This is the enlargement of the object in question. Now let's talk about the analysis. What can we do with analysis? First, I would like to stress the pictures is something which is very heavy in terms of emotion, because in the mind of many people, a picture is a proof. The typical phrase is, oh, they are boring with their UFOs. Let them just show me a good picture at last of a UFO and I will be sure. And there is this idea that a picture is the ultimate proof, which of course it is not at all. And I will talk about that. And the picture is not a full representation of what happens. Without going very far into physics, the reality in front of a camera is a reality that takes place in 4 dimensions. You've got the 3 dimensions of the volume, and you've got the time. Now, to get a picture, a still picture, you make a projection and an integration, to take knowledgeable terms, and bring it down to 2 dimensions, because a picture is just 2 dimensions. So you can imagine that going from 4 to 2 dimensions, you lose a lot of information. So if you have to study what happened at that time, you need other information, which means either other pictures taken from other points or other testimonies or records of other sort. Now, a video is a series of photos to a certain extent. But again, it can lose information in terms of time because a video takes so many frames per second. And if you have something which is much faster, it will escape, or it will give a strange effect, as we know from stroboscopy when you see a chariot's wheel which is turning a reverse side. So a picture is a limited source of information. So it can never be as such a proof. Of course, today this is much more true than ever. I was saying that 30 years ago, but still, I said it's possible, and I was betting on that several times to create a false picture that will resist all analysis. It was possible, but it was very tricky at that time. Nowadays, it's a baby's game. You just have all the software you want to produce what you like, or you just take a smartphone and push the option inlay a UFO, and you get a UFO. So thank you, guys. That's very good. So a picture will never be a proof, especially nowadays. But it may prove very useful because it can bring additional information if by other means we can establish the truth of the story. What can be measured in an image? The first thing that can be measured is not length. You cannot, from an image, measure the length of an object. You can measure an angle. That's all you can, if you have the available technical data. What you can measure also is luminance, to take a scientific term. Say the level, each pixel making up a picture has a value in black and white comprised between 0 for black and 255 for white. So this can be measured because we see what we have in the picture. We can also evaluate the sharpness at the limits of an object. You know, an object may be blurred or may be sharp, and this can be measured, really. And we can also make comparisons of colors and textures. Now, to do the angular measurement, which are the key because the key problem is really, I see an object that is not recognized on a picture. I don't know what it is. There is no way to have an idea of its size if you have no idea of its distance, and vice versa. So, and even to have a relation between two, you have to measure angles. And to measure angles, you need to know the settings of the camera. What are the characteristics? I'm not going to enter details here again. It's not the place, but you have to dispose of that, or of what we call the EXIF data. EXIF data are data which, whether you know it or not, in each digital picture, there are data which are inlaid at the beginning of the file, which tells you which day it is, which time, which make of the make of the camera, the model, and the exposure time, and many things like this. So of course, if you have these original data, you can reconstruct interesting things like angular dimension. And out of angular dimension, what is useful, you can derive a ratio between size and distance, which it means I know that if this thing is 1 kilometer from the camera, the size is 10 meters. But if it is 1 meter from the camera, the size is 1 centimeter. And the same for velocity. If we have either a set of different pictures or different pictures out of a video, or if we have even one long exposure picture and we see a piece of line, like all pictures with a bird, innumerable birds in the UFO business nowadays, you can determine a ratio between the transverse velocity of this object or animal and the distance from the camera, which is very important to solve many of these problems. Now, this is just a drawing to remind the basis of an angular measurement. You have here the double arrow, which figures, say, the camera or the lens, and the object to be photographed on the right, and the photographed object on the picture on the left. And you see that the angle is the same on both sides. And on one side, you have the real distance. On the other side, the focal length. And there are some relations between all these things. Now, talking about the luminance, as I said before, the levels of the pixels, you can make measurements, of course, on one particular pixel, but interesting is, and very often used is to look after a given area, for instance, the area of an unknown object, and then have a statistic, what is the darkest point, what is the clearest point in this area, or to analyze along a segment. Means we draw a segment on a picture, and for each point we see what's the level of the gray, and we draw the curve and see. I will show you an example of what it means. And the use of this is just to make comparisons and ordering. As I said before, if we have the angular measurement, if we have an idea of the distance, we know the size of the object, which is capital, because we are very often talking of a large vessel in the sky and so on. In the fact, we have a small fly, just because the distance is not the same. So how can we have the distance? We must get it from another source. So in some cases, we get it from comparisons. For instance, if we see an object which is in front of a house, and we know the distance of the house, of course, we know the object was not farther than that. If there is a cloud, the same thing. Now, there are other ways, more sophisticated, to determine this, and one way is to look after the luminance. Here again, I'm not going to go into the equations because they are lengthy and boring, but just simplified way to say things. If you have a black object, whatever, you say a black book, and you take your camera, and the book is quite near the camera, you see this object, it is black. Now, if, say we are doing that in the daylight, somewhere outside, you take this object and you move it away and move it away. And the more you move it, the less it will be black. It will become gray, dark gray, light gray, and in the end, after a few kilometers, it will be the same color as the sky. So we use this property of atmospheric diffusion to make classifications. If we can compare dark objects, one of which is the unknown object, the others are known objects of which we know the distance, we can have comparisons. I will show you a practical example of that. That's the kind of tricks we can have to work on a picture. Now, the other and the last point is the sharpness, as I said. Here again, if we can estimate and make a kind of measurement of the sharpness of the edge of an object, sharpness or blurredness if it's blurred, and compare to other objects, we can have the same kind of classification, because some other properties of atmospheric diffusion in certain conditions are such that the sharpness is diminishing with distance. So here again, you have comparison objects, you have the unknown object, you have cases where you can say, it was no more than so many meters from the camera. Comparison, ordering. This shows you what is done in terms of sharpness. I've taken a segment. You see a vector crossing the side of this magnificent UFO. And downwards, in the lower part, you see the curve, which shows the level of darkness along this thing. And we see the way the transition is done. If it's very sharp, the transition is vertical, it goes like a step function. If it is a bit more blurred, it will go over so many pixels to go from one value to the other. Okay, I stop with this. So again, the critical point is estimation of distance for unknown objects. And we can establish it from visible elements. We can establish it from the camera's depth of field. Oh, sorry for this horrible word, but with a given setting, a given camera will have a given depth of field, which means there will be a minimum distance and a maximum distance between which objects will appear sharp. Of course, if you don't move, because if you move, everything is blurred. But if it's well taken, objects lower than this minimum distance will be blurred, and possibly objects beyond the maximum will be blurred. So that can be a source of information, and we use it, especially for objects which are very near. There are lots of pseudo objects called orbs or whatever, which are most of the time, I should not say 100% because I don't know, but most of the time are just dust, and this can be proven. which are very close, and this is seen just from the blood mess. I must say that one of the difficulties we have is that the situation has changed completely with digital photos. It has changed in a positive way because, contrary to the past where we said, how can we get a picture from a UFO? Somebody never sees a UFO or once in a life. Why should he have immediately a camera at hand ready to use? This would never happen. Now the situation has changed positively to that respect because everyone has got a cell phone and can take pictures from morning to the evening and is used to do that. The drawback is that there are different characteristics. Generally speaking, the digital pictures or digital cameras have a different depth of field, which means the minimum distance from the camera for objects to be sharp is much smaller than before, which means that we see small objects and small rubbish which we didn't see in silver pictures. And this explains many of the problems, because for us it's a problem of innumerable pictures showing, in fact, insects which are very near, but we are seen by this because the characteristics are different. Another point is that in compact digital cameras, the flash is very near the lens. So it can really illuminate small dust very near the lens, which is not the case if the flash is a bit further. So all these conditions make it complicated, but the depth of field is a source of information. Atmospheric diffusion, as I said, for daily pictures can give you a comparison with other objects, and atmospheric absorption for night pictures for other reasons. So when we dispose of angle that can be measured on an image and distance or estimation of distance of a range of possible distances, we have a range of possible sizes. A small example, here is a picture taken in West Indies in 2004. And we see in the circle a small object, which is rather dark. And of course, this was presented as a vessel with probably 14 extraterrestrial beings inside before we received it. And if what we just needed to do is, because the question is it big and far or small and near? Of course, that's the initial question, is to draw what I call a cross-section, a radiometric cross-section. You see the red line, it is crossing the picture, crossing the object, and crossing the cactuses quite near here, which are very dark area. And on the right part, you see the graph. And the arrow shows you the point which corresponds. So the graph shows the level of the pixels. High level is white, low level is black. So you see the clear part, and you see a peak exactly for the object, which is at the level of darkness, which is absolutely comparable to the very left part of the graph, which shows the cactus here. So to make it brief, of course, it needs more explanations, but the fact that the thing is as dark as the object very near proves it cannot be further than these objects. So, of course, at this distance, it's only an insect. It cannot be anything else. That was a very, very interesting case. Again, I was writing another, 25 years later, another contract for the Space Agency, but this time it was in 2009 or something like this. And in the same time, I received a case which is illustrated by this picture. During an event that takes place every year, which is a world competition of hot air balloons, there was a series of pictures taken by many people, but in particular one witness. And one of the pictures showed definitely an object which had nothing to do with a hot air balloon. In fact, there were several pictures showing this object, but we just concentrated on that one. It was enough to treat the subject. So here we are in good conditions because we have in the same pictures objects of which we know the size. I mean the hot air balloons. We know the diameter, standard diameter is always around 15 meters. And we have dark parts on the baskets below the balloons, and the object seems to be dark as well, completely dark. So we can make a comparison of the darkest point of the areas corresponding to the object and to the baskets of several of the balloons. And we see here between parentheses the level being so many, 12, 24, and so on. So by making comparison, we could prove that this object, this dark object, was at a distance comprised between the distance of one of the balloons and the distance of the other balloon. And since we know the diameter of the balloon, we could reconstitute the whole business. And my conclusion was this object is about 75 centimeters long, and it's about 300 meters from the camera. And I published this in the report, in the contract I had, as an example, and that went away. And a few months later, the UFO investigator, private guy called Mr. Cortes, who had done the investigation, called me and said, we have finished the investigation, and we've identified the guy who left a child's balloon. Yeah, I forgot to say my conclusion being the size of 75 centimeters. It was probably a children's balloon. And the conclusion of the investigator was he had identified the guy who had left a child's balloon in the air with a picture of this model exactly, and we knew exactly, and with a 5%, 10% difference, it was exactly the measurement we had done with this technique. So it's just a proof that it makes sense. So very often we use that, not necessarily to have a final explanation, but to find limits in possible sizes of objects. To finish, I will say 2 words very shortly, because if someone is interested, I will really be available during the next 2 days with my computers and software here. We have worked for several years on a dedicated software. In fact, the chance I had is I was authorized after negotiations to reuse the software on which my engineers have been working during the 18 years existence of my company when I was working on intelligence. We developed a software together with operational people of intelligence, again with many countries. So we had something very strong operationally. And when I thought of making a dedicated tool for UFOs, I thought we would have to have the same basis. Of course, it's completely different afterward. There are different stuff to be done, but the groundwork, which costed hundreds of years of engineers for the initial software, we should have to redevelop from scratch. But I had the chance to negotiate with EADS, the company who bought my company, the rights to reuse parts of the code of the initial software. So since 2009, I'm developing with the JPAN and for him and for myself, the property is both, the IPACO software, which aim is to be as simple as possible for image analysts. I had the same problem with intelligence officers before. If the guy has a problem to solve, he has to be concentrated on what he does. In this case, on UFO thinkings, not on computer science and which software should I get. Should I get a Mac for this thing and a PC and this environment? And so the software is just made for that. It doesn't bring a lot of new algorithms or magic things, but it copes with most of the cases. Of course, there will always be cases where you need a dedicated software to do a very specific work, but most of the time we can do with that. So that's it. I will just finish by showing you 2 examples of new tools we have put in this IPACO software, dedicated this time to UFO. The first thing is talking about flares. As you know, flares are events that happen. Sometimes you see some spots in night pictures, sometimes with strange shapes, strange colors, and they may correspond to just the existence of a luminous source somewhere else in the field. And the characteristic is that the line which joins, when there is a flare, on the picture which joins the flare to the source of light it corresponds to, is passing through the optical center of the picture. So we have a very, very simple tool with which, when you have such a picture, you just designate the UFOs between quotes, and it will automatically trace the straight lines going through the optical center. And in this case, we see that the correspondence with the light sources, which are the cause of these flares. But flares are sometimes very, very strange. They look like mushrooms or things like that. And last but not least, the last picture I will show you for the oldest members of this honorable assistance. We were attacking again the very old and mythic pictures from McMinnville. These two famous pictures of the years 50 with something which seems to be either a big object in the sky or a model suspended by a thread from a power wire. In fact, with the group of IPACO, I should say that this work on IPACO is accompanied by a work on a dedicated website called ipaco.fr, where we explain everything we know about techniques to methodology to analyze images with many examples. And to be honest, I must say I do that with two friends and companions. The first one is called Jeff Quick. He is British. Nobody is perfect. But he is a former officer, intelligence officer of the Royal Air Force with an incredible skill. I knew him as he was director of a big European intelligence center for space images, and incredible experience in operational tools and centers to analyze images, and also a very sound experience of UFOs. And incidentally, he also helped me to write, I hope, correct English for the proceedings or things like this. And the second one is a young French guy, very, very dedicated to picture analysis. He's very active on all the UFO-related forums in English or in French. His nickname is 11 August. Maybe some of you have heard of him. And of course, he's a very good user of all the software we develop. So we have attacked, we wanted to restudy these McMinnville pictures and produced a big report, which is on our website, in last April, just to show how to work quickly with our techniques. But the conclusions we had were about the same as previous investigators. There were many, many investigators, and the most brilliant ones, many of them being Americans, on this subject, and many of them suspected it could be a model suspended, but nobody could show the existence of the thread. And we went to the same conclusion. We couldn't show the thread, but with the new techniques, we can show that the probability is extremely large that this thing is a thread. But then we started thinking again, and in the last 2 months, so it's very recent, we built up a new tool, original algorithm, specifically dedicated to suspending thread for UFO pictures, which allow identifying, at least with a very, very high probability, the existence with a given angle of a thread somewhere in the picture. And bingo, with the McMinnville pictures, it did work. And as we see here, but I will show more on my computer for those who are interested tomorrow, we can see one picture which illustrates the end of these methods. And we see the blue line is figurating the angle where obviously there is something, a straight configuration, which can only be a thread, with an angle of 11 degrees below the power wire. So I've been maybe long and a little bit boring, I'm sorry, but that's it. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. If you have a few questions, I'm ready to answer anything I will ask you.